from a broad market perspective, there's probably not a big difference, to be frank. However, the issue comes down to whether the homeowner or investor wants to assume the risk, right?
Got
As
it.
I
Okay.
mentioned, the risk of getting shut down from the city, from a neighbor complaint or tenant complaint, or if it's not done with inspection and not done legally, should there be an accident like a fire or something, that's a huge liability potentially for that investor.
Welcome to the Deals Estate Wholesaling Podcast, where we discuss finding, financing, and facilitating off-market real estate deals. I'm your host, Lega, and I'm joined today on the show by Andy Tran to discuss and share his knowledge on how you can find properties with conversion and housing densification upside. Now, a little bit about Andy. Andy is a registered house and small business designer. He's also a real estate investor and a developer. He holds a degree in architectural science from Ryerson University in Toronto. He founded Suite Additons, which is a company that has assisted investors and homeowners in converting over 300 single-family homes to contain legal additional suites since 2015. His company's mission is to help people gain financial security through these various housing densification strategies. In today's episode, Andy and I discuss what all the hype about conversions and housing densification is all about. We discussed common mistakes or pitfalls that real estate investors make when doing conversion projects. And we also discuss how to navigate the city permitting and regulatory landscape when undertaking these projects. So guys, you do not want to miss this episode. Sit back and listen to the very end. Now, before we dive in, again, we want to say a big thank you to everyone who is tuning in. If you are a fan of this podcast, please like and subscribe to the podcast and hit that notification button. That will be greatly appreciated. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Hi, Andy. Welcome to the Deals Estate Wholesaling Podcast.
Hey, Deji, thanks a lot for having me.
Thank you very much for coming on, and thank you for your flexibility in making this session work. I'm really excited about the conversation that we're going to have today.
Absolutely. Let's go.
Cool. So it's actually interesting because a lot of people know this podcast as a wholesaling podcast. And as you know, wholesaling is really the art of, finding discounted deals, off-market deals, and the exit of assigning it to an investor. But it's interesting because when wholesalers are finding deals or when investors are looking for deals, there's quite a number of things that you take into account in looking for a deal. And why I think this episode is very important is because there's quite a number of exit options that I think nowadays, given the interest rates and the market that we're in, I think there's a lot of exit options now that seem to be the right option to go with. And that's why we're having this conversation today. So again, thank you very much for coming on here to share your experience. But before we dive in, if you could share with everyone who Andy Tran is, how you got into real estate and what you do today.
Sure. Yeah. So just a little bit about myself. So my background, I studied architectural design way back from Ryerson University and did some design and worked for a contractor for a little while. I actually got into the home inspection industry in the 2000s and around the late 2000s, I really started exploring different options in real estate investing. And at the same time, while I was working in the home inspection industry, I was actually assisting a lot of home inspection clients with information on converting to secondary suites. And
Yep.
at the time, I didn't have a lot of experience with it. So I did a lot of research. I actually went through the process myself on my own property.
Okay.
And during that process, and at the same time, I started investing myself in single family homes starting in 2010. It made a lot of sense to me that this is something that was going to be a necessity going forward, given where real estate prices were going,
Yep.
I guess 10, 15 years ago. And the rest is history in terms of where the real estate market has gone, and adding additional suites has been even more important since then, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of the background is, once I had seen that this was a viable business, I moved out of the home inspection industry. I was actually working in their education department for a
Okay.
company in Toronto called Carson Dunlop. And once I saw the opportunity, I said, working in the design and consulting space with conversions to second suites, additional suites, and now we're seeing garden suites as well, to be a very lucrative opportunity. And in addition to investors and homeowners being able to profit very well from these types of strategies, it also helps the community by providing more housing units. And so we started in 2015, and we've been pretty much nonstop ever since in the past 8 years.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very, very much for that summary. Now, you touched on it a little bit about, why it's important for investors to focus on this strategy. But if you could maybe break that down for us, like in today's market, given, the prices of homes, yeah, it's come down, but just like relative to years back, given the interest rate hikes, can you share with us your thoughts on the importance of, housing densification strategies for real estate investors and how that can, help them stay afloat and manage the housing prices today?
Sure, yeah. So I'll explain the importance of it using the example of my property, my first single family detached property that I purchased in Hamilton in 2010. So
Okay.
when I purchased that property, I was able to rent it out for the entire home for $1,500 a month. It was a rent to own program. I
Okay.
was able to allocate $200 towards the tenant for potential future purchase through that rent to own program. And I
Yep.
still had $200 left in cash flow, right?
Okay.
That's pretty incredible when you really look at those, what you were able to do. I guess that was, 12, 13 years ago. And,
Yep.
the numbers have changed incredibly since then. And nowadays, you cannot even cash flow with one single unit, which is why starting in the mid 2000s, when we started the business, it was pretty much standard that when you purchase an investment property with a single family home, if you wanted to have cash flow, you would have to add in that second unit.
Yep.
And that's why it made a lot of sense. And since then, since the mid 20 teens, 2015 till now, prices have continued to escalate, where we're looking for even further creative strategies to make the numbers work. And of course, with the policy being changed to allow for more densification, such as being able to provide 3 units minimum, garden suites, and multiplexes in Toronto, it's something that is not only a necessity for investors to be able to cash flow, it is also a great demand from the marketplace, right? And so this is something that we see as a huge opportunity for investors who can identify these opportunities to have a significant competitive advantage over other people that are also looking for the properties.
Perfect. So one of the questions that we had today was obviously how to identify these types of properties. But
Mhm.
before we get there, like there's quite a number of changes, as you've mentioned, in terms of policies that are happening. There was a big push about Bill 23, also like the changes in Toronto. From your standpoint, like there's the federal changes, Bill 23, there's the city changes. Where do you see a lot of these changes happen? Are they happening more around like the federal level? Are they happening around cities? Is it only Toronto? Like, what are your thoughts in terms of how cities in Ontario and just in Canada are moving, in line with a lot of these policies and how it affects investors?
Sure. Yeah. So the big policy drive is from the provincial level. We saw that in 2012 when they mandated that every municipality with, at the time it was Bill 140, requiring every municipality to allow secondary suites as legal.
Yep.
So before 2012, it was really only the city of Toronto that had that uh, bylaw in place, whereas other cities had the opportunity to say no to second suites. So 2012 was when the province pushed for second suites. And
Yep.
you mentioned Bill 23 recently to push for 3 units. So essentially, what the province has done was step in and said that every city now needs to allow for a minimum of 3 units, uh, and at least one of those units needs to be a detached accessory dwelling unit or garden suite, as we call them commonly. So cities can no longer say no to 3 units. It's really up to them, though, as to exactly how they're going to implement them in terms of some of the bylaws.
Okay.
It'll dictate things like the unit sizes, lot size requirements, minimum parking mandates, things like that. The city will have the ability to do them. So the push really we see comes from the provincial level, but there are some municipalities themselves that are very progressive, and they see this as an opportunity to provide more housing in their community, which is desperately needed in every city and town in Ontario.
Yep.
And then also a potential revenue generator in the form of property taxes and hopefully economic growth down the road.
Okay. And from a city level, if you were to mention like the top 3 cities, or maybe the top 5, if they're even up to 5, the top cities that, as you mentioned, are really progressive right now, are really like, slamming the accelerator, like, let's go.
Mm-hmm.
Which 3 cities would you echo?
Well, I can really only speak to my own experience,
Okay.
and Ontario is a big province. I've only done work in the Golden Horseshoe, so I
Okay.
can only speak to those cities. I've probably worked with a couple of dozen municipalities here in the Golden Horseshoe.
Okay.
So from a practical standpoint, every city has its pros and cons.
Yeah.
Every city has its challenges with growth and in ensuring that they have adequate resources uh, in order to facilitate all of these changes and all of this growth and all of the policy changes, right? So many cities are doing the best that they can. So in our experience, we find that the 3 cities that are more progressive and we've had a good experience, overall, right? Again, there's always challenges. Is the city of Toronto, Hamilton, and Kitchener, and those are the primary markets that we work on right now. Uh, exactly for that reason, is because they are progressive, they have the policies in place, and we're very familiar with the things that they're looking for, and are able to comply with their mandates for these types of housing options.
Okay. And by progressive, you mean, for example, like speed of getting the permits, or like the cost, or like the clarity of the bylaws, or what would you consider like a progressive city?
Sure, yeah. So when I say progressive, I mean all those points that you had mentioned are valid, and they, at some level have been able to address all of those things. But I would say when I mean progressive, I mean from a city planning perspective,
Okay.
housing planning, they are progressive in allowing more densification and recognizing the importance of being able to utilize the existing low-rise infrastructure in the city and providing more housing units with that existing infrastructure, right?
Okay. Okay.
So there are municipalities, and I actually won't name them, but there are municipalities that are not as keen as those, the ones that I mentioned, like Toronto, Hamilton, Kitchener. They're not as keen as those cities when it comes to densification. They would much rather prefer them to keep the neighborhoods as is and would rather expand outward.
Okay.
In our opinion, though, expanding outward is not sustainable
Yeah.
mostly from a financial perspective.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So if an investor, was listening to this, and they're like, Hamilton, Kitchener, Toronto, I would focus on these cities, but how do I even know what I'm looking for? What types of properties fit this criteria?
Well, I can certainly direct them to my YouTube channel and website for more information as to what things to look for. But to answer that question at a very high level, there are a number of things that you want to look for. You want to look for the lot sizes. You want to look at the housing type to see if it's conducive to doing a conversion, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, if you had a large home with a big footprint and you have a large basement, that would make sense for a basement second suite. If you have a large backyard or a nice corner lot, that would facilitate the construction of a good sized um, gardening suite or accessory dwelling unit, then that would make sense, right?
Yeah.
So that's physical lots would be one of the primary things you would look for. Physical property.
Yeah.
Of course, you want to ensure that you're in the correct zone.
Yeah.
Now, the policies that we mentioned, Bill 23, 4 additional units. They're targeting a lot of the really low-rise suburban neighborhoods, right? So your typical R1 neighborhood,
Yep.
where mostly all you see is
Single family.
detached homes, semi-detached homes, townhouses. Those are the areas that they're targeting for more densification, for 3 units, including the garden suite. So all things being equal, you want to have a larger lot uh, that will allow you to create more housing units in a comfortable manner where you can have multiple occupants and they don't feel like they're kind of all jammed into one tiny little property, right?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. And if we were to dive into, like the types of renovations that are involved in like a conversion project, like are they different to the standard renovation projects? Like if I wanted to just renovate like a single family property and maybe put like a secondary unit, but not a legal unit, just like an in-law suite, versus I was doing a conversion project, like a 1 to 2, maybe a 1 to 3, or maybe like a garden suite. Like, how do you see those projects different in terms of like the rental scope, the rental costs, and also like the skill sets that are involved in actually doing the job?
Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion around this, right? So especially what you just mentioned there, an in-law suite. From the building code perspective, there's really no such thing as an in-law suite that is not an additional unit, that is not an additional dwelling unit. The fact is, if you have 2 separate kitchens, it is automatically determined to be a separate dwelling unit,
Oh, I
right?
see. Okay.
So from that standpoint, you would have to comply with all the building code requirements. So you would have to have proper fire separation. You would have to have proper smoke alarms, and carbon monoxide detectors, proper egress requirements for each dwelling unit. So there is a lot of confusion around that because the term in-law suite versus, let's say, a duplex or a accessory dwelling unit, sometimes these are phrases that are um, at the city planning department, not really at the building code, right?
Yep.
So whenever someone approaches us and say they want to put in an in-law suite or another unit with a kitchen in it, then we automatically say that you're adding in additional units. So you're converting a single family to 2, or you're converting 2 families to 3, or 1 to 3, or whatever way you're doing it. So the renovation is going to be the same, right? You want to have the proper separation. Now, if you're doing a standard finished basement, for example, where you have a recreational room or a family room, there's no kitchen, maybe there's a bathroom,
Yeah.
then that does not require the extent of renovation that would be required compared to another unit with a
Got
kitchen,
it.
right? So you might see a basement recreational room where you have ceiling tile. Sometimes they're not even finished. So there's no problems, as long as you don't have a separate unit. Okay.
Okay.
Now, if you do have a separate unit, again, it's going to vary quite a bit. The costs are going to be substantially different because you don't have those and safety and property standards as dictated by the code that would be involved. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yes, it does. So if I could play this back as a wholesaler, for example, if I walk into a property and I see that the basement or the additional dwelling unit has a kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
that already tells me that the budget for that renovation must include the things like fire separation, like the full 9 yards. But if it doesn't have a kitchen, then the budget might not necessarily be as extensive and as expensive.
Yeah, yeah. But the idea is that you want to add in that kitchen for the additional revenue, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, you know, I would still say that in my experience, probably a majority of the additional units, mostly in the basement with kitchens, are probably not legal. And depending on the municipality and their enforcement policies, that may or may not be an issue. But in every city that we've worked with, there have been, like, I've had a sizable portion of my clients contact me because they've had a neighbor file a complaint or they had a tenant file a complaint.
Got
and
it.
then the city came and said, you have to convert this legally, or we're going to shut your unit down, right? So
Ooh.
um, basically, yeah, if you're looking to add in a kitchen, you should potentially, whether it's there or not already, you should potentially budget for it, um, so that you don't have that problem, right? Now, at the
Yep.
end of the day, it's up to the investor. We're not here to say what you should do. We're just here to provide the information.
Yeah.
Sometimes we go out, we do a consultation, we do a detailed, 1-2 hour consultation on site, and the homeowner or investor decide, hey, you know what, this is not a legal unit. I'm not going to go through this process. I'm going to kind of play things by ear. That's
Yep.
totally, that's totally up to them, right? So they assume that risk. We're here just to provide them with the information, and then they can decide if they want to proceed forward or not.
Got it. In your experience, right? So there's 3 metrics that I would like to share with you. And in your experience, I would just like to know how, the legality of the second unit impacts those metrics. So, one is how much you can rent the unit for. So a legal second suite versus, it's not like legal, it probably doesn't have the right fire separation and the right code. Do you see a massive variance in what you can actually rent both units for? That's one. The second would be like if you are selling the property. So I'm selling a property with an illegal suite that someone can live in, on the down low,
Mhm.
versus I'm selling a property with an actual legal suite. Do you see differences in what the sale price would be on the market? And then the third one would be refinance. If I'm actually refinancing a building, would the lender, give me a significant bump because the suite is legal versus it's like, what, you're getting rent from this, it might not be legal. Maybe it's only an uplift of $10,000. Like, do you see that the ROI is there for an investor to actually go through the full end process of legalizing the suite? Like,
Yeah, so I'll try to answer those first 2 questions.
yeah,
The answer that I provide might actually be relevant for those first 2 questions. So in terms of rent and purchase,
okay,
I would say that the majority of the population, so the general population, are really not aware of the difference between legal and illegal, right?
got it.
They're relying a lot on their realtors, and a lot of their realtors don't have the answers. And so, the reality is that if you're just looking at it strictly from a numbers perspective, then it may not make a difference, actually, right? If, let's say, you have one unit here that is legal and they spent the extra few $1,000s to go through the design process and go through the inspections, and then the other one here where they've done the same renovation but they didn't get a permit and they didn't do the inspections, from a visual standpoint they're going to look exactly the same. And how many tenants are going to ask you, is this legal or not? A lot of them don't even know. So a lot of them assume it's legal, right?
Yeah,
And that goes also with selling, purchasing, right? A purchaser, they're not going to know the difference that one is legal and one is illegal unless they're savvy and they've watched our content and they know to look right. So from a broad market perspective, there's probably not a big difference, to be frank. However, the issue comes down to whether the homeowner or investor wants to assume the risk, right?
got it.
As I
Okay.
mentioned, the risk of getting shut down from the city, from a neighbor complaint or tenant complaint, or if it's not done with inspection and not done legally, should there be an accident like a fire or something, that's a huge liability potentially for that investor.
We'll
So
see.
now, regardless of whether you want to do it legally or illegally, you probably want to make sure it's safe. You want to make sure you have egress windows for people to escape. You want to make sure you have a proper fire separation. You want to make sure you have proper smoke and fire alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, and things like that, right? So really, the renovation, whether it's legal or illegal, is probably going to be the same. The difference in cost would be obviously hiring a designer, an architect to do the work, and the city permits, right? So typically that's going to be an additional $5,000 to $10,000 to go through that process. So most people that we work with, anyways, don't have any issues with spending that extra to have that peace of mind,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So that answers really the first 2. The last one is whether the lenders will consider legal an important consideration when they're doing a refinance. And I will say that that is something we've seen over the past few years as being more of an issue. So we've had many clients ask us, how do I get a registration, like a zoning a verification report or a registry showing that my unit's now legal. So I would always advise them to obtain something from the city, whether it's an official document like a zoning verification report, whether it's on an official registry, or
Yep.
whether it's a simple email from the inspector or the building department say that you've passed your inspection, you have final occupancy, and you combine that with your permit drawings and your permit document. That's going to be enough to indicate that it's legal. And a lot of people have provided that documentation to their lender, and the lender will look at that and say, okay, this is a legal unit. Now, in terms of the difference, I don't know what the exact number is, but it is higher. I can say, I can't give you any numbers, but I can say with experience that in general, the numbers have been higher for legal units versus illegal units from a refinance perspective.
Got it. Okay. Thank you for that. So outside of an investor not doing the permits or not going through the permitting process, if you were to share from your experience the common pitfalls that investors make when taking on these projects, what would you say those pitfalls are?
When looking for projects where they're looking to do a conversion?
Yeah, so it could be when they are looking for the projects, it could be in maybe misrepresenting what can be done. So for example, I'm looking at the project and I'm thinking, you know what, I think I can sever this lot. And then I go firm, no, I can't sever the lots. Like from your standpoint, like, do you see common issues that keep recurring from your experience where, you could consider these as pitfalls or, just mistakes that investors make, that your business essentially helps them to,
Sure. Yeah. I would say the most common pitfall that is not, it's not a huge game changer, but it is a setback for a lot of people, is that they may make a purchase above what the value of the property is. So they may see a house with a finished basement. Maybe there's a kitchen in there. And to them, it looks like everything meets the requirements and they can rent it out for X dollars. And then they get us in there and we tell them that if they want to legalize it, they have to do this work. The contractor goes in and quotes them, and they're kind of, they have a little bit of a setback because they didn't expect to spend the extra, whatever it is, $7,500, $100,000, because they assumed that the previous seller that had done the work had everything compliant already.
Yeah.
Sometimes, it's already finished, but, the wiring is in bad shape. The plumbing's in bad shape. They don't have proper fire separation. So I would say that's probably the most common pitfall is people they make these purchases without knowing the level of quality of the work that was done previously. There's a lot of, really bad contractors out there. There's a lot of homeowners that do the work themselves.
Yep.
And you have to be very careful because some of them will even, put in fire rated drywall and put in an egress window and they'll call it legal. And unless you have a permit from the city, there's no way you can call it legal, right? So obviously that's a liability on their part, but it also is an issue for the novice investor who goes in and listens to, the seller or the realtor saying that this is a legal unit. So unless you have the document to prove it, it's not, right?
Yep.
I would say that's probably the most common pitfall. And then you mentioned, severability and things like that. Yeah, I mean, sometimes people go in and they say, I should be able to sever this property, but it's not that easy because it's not an as of right process with the city. You always have to go through a particular process, whether it's, a minor variance or a consent application. There are a lot of steps, and then your neighbors get involved as well. So I would say that would be a good, if you have that as your target, but always have a backup plan, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that there is a document that you should essentially get, to confirm the status of a legal suite. And I imagine that, again, once you go through the permitting process, the city gives you a document that certifies that this is illegal. basement or legal suite. So that's the document that you're referring to, that, if you are buying a property with the expectation and the understanding that this is basically a legal suite, you should have that document that certifies that from the city.
Yeah. So we advise our clients to always obtain some documentation when they complete their project, so that in the future, if they're refinancing or if they're selling their property, to have that available, right?
Yeah.
Most people who actually have that information will happily present it to a buyer, because it means the value of the property is going to be higher, right?
Got it.
If you are looking at a property and you're asking and they don't have anything, or they're just saying that it's legal and take my word for it, usually it's not, right? So most people that have the documentation would happily provide it.
Okay. And in terms of timelines, you mentioned that it would be like an additional $5,000 to $10,000 for the permitting process for the designer. But another thing that I know that could potentially pose as a concern is the duration of the permitting process, because that drives the holding cost. Now, if I took a private mortgage to close on a property, and then I'm paying like $5,000 a month, and I believe, okay, this is going to take 2 months, and it takes like 12 months. Now I'm in for like $60K versus like $10K. So like, what are your thoughts in terms of like the average duration of these types of projects across these major cities that you see that are very progressive?
Sure. Yeah. So that's definitely a valid concern. And that's one thing that you have to factor in, right? Is the additional holding costs as a result of delays. Now, with the city, a lot, it's outside of our control. But we generally have a good handle on how long it's going to take. And most conversions that are simple conversions, like basement suites, most of the time they're within 2 to 3 months that you'll be able to get your permit from the time that you start the process.
Okay.
And then your other stuff really comes down to your own experience, right? With construction. So if your expectation was that the construction was going to take 2 months and then it took 12 months, well, what's the issue there? Who dropped the ball? Was it the contractor? Was it the investor? Right? Was it that the investor didn't do their due diligence with the contractor? That is the issue in a lot of cases. And so it would be more risky for a new investor, of course, if they don't have the experience. And this is why you want to make sure that for your audience who are on the more inexperienced side, is to make sure they get proper referrals and things like that. But over time, the investor should be able to tighten up their timelines. A little bit of flexibility with the city, but allocating, say, 2 to 3 months with the city, and then, of course, adding time working with a designer, and then working with their contractor to make sure that they stay within a certain time frame, right? And making sure those numbers work. Again, whether you go through the city process or not, the contracting is going to be the same, right? So really, it's the addition of the cost, as you mentioned, the $5,000 to $10,000, and then potentially another 2 to 3 months in holding time, right? So you have to kind of look and see, is that additional timeline and the additional cost worth it in the long run, especially if you're holding the property for a long duration.
Got it. And as much as there's variability in the quotes that you get from contractors, like a typical basement suite conversion, like in today's market with today's rates, like what would it cost on just a wide range for an investor who is converting like a single family to a duplex?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors involved, right? It's a moving target. I'll probably I'll throw out a ballpark number out there, but it varies quite a bit. It varies on the size, obviously. Depending on the size, the per square footage price comes down. Depends on what additional work needs to be done. Is there additional utility work? Increasing electricity, increasing plumbing requirements, heating systems, various different factors. Depends on the market as well that you're doing the project in. But a very rough range would probably be the $125 to $150 per square foot range for a very typical basement second suite. That is kind of middle of the road, investor grade, durable, simple, standard type of renovation.
Got it. Okay. All right, cool. So if an investor was looking to take down a conversion project and they came to your business, how do you guys typically help with the process from end to end? Like if you were to walk us through that end to end process of where your company comes in, is it in the initial due diligence phase? Is it in the phase when I'm buying the property? Is it when I go firm? Like at what points do you guys essentially start your process?
So our process starts when typically when they have the offer accepted, right? So we
Okay.
try to do our best to educate people through our various online content and the seminars that we do and podcasts such as this to educate people as much as possible or direct them to areas where they can get educated and that their realtors also get educated and find
Yeah.
property. And we basically jump in at the point of when their offer is accepted. Typically, during that closing period, we advise them to get a long closing period. We go on site, do measurements, provide them with conceptual designs, work with them on the design and the permit drawings, and then we submit the documents on their behalf with the city, and we communicate with the city until they get those permits approved, and then from there they take the baton and basically work with their contractor for the rest of the project, and we're there in the background as a coach or consultant to guide them through the process during that construction renovation period. So that's kind of our scope of work in a typical project.
Okay. There's one question that I wanted to get clarity on, which for me, like, is very inundating, which is the city permitting process. So I don't know if it's the documentation, like the zoning bylaws. When you go into those documents, you see a lot of numbers. You see like square meters, square foot. Minimum lot size, maximum lot size. Like there's just a lot of numbers. That you need to sort of go through, and then just engaging the city, knowing who to call. Are you calling the planning department? Like what questions to ask in that whole process? Like, can you provide us insights into like how investors can work better with the cities? How to essentially do that due diligence with the cities, and just that whole process of like the city permitting process and any regulatory considerations.
Sure. Yeah. Anybody can go and get that information. Unfortunately, most cities and towns don't do a great job of providing the information in a manner that is easy for the layperson to read. A lot of it is very written in a format, whether it's the building code, whether it's the bylaws, in a way that only professionals can understand. But some cities will provide, little cheat sheets or things on their website that highlights kind of the main points, right? So I would urge people that really want to understand it is to become familiar with the city website for that particular municipality that they're working with. And I would urge people to kind of, at the beginning anyways, stick with one city or town that they're familiar, that they're comfortable investing in, and become familiar with them. And then go through the website first, try to get as much information, absorb as much information. And then if there's anything that you don't understand, you can send them an email or give them a call to get clarity. But it takes time, right?
Yeah.
It's not something that you can spend just an hour or two and expect to be able to really fully understand it. It takes time to understand. It takes a lot of communication. And for us, it took years for us to really become familiar with the handful of municipalities that we're working with and their exact process, right?
Got it.
So that's why a lot of people hire us, is because we speak their language and we have that experience. We know, when we're going in and submitting a permit document for the city of Hamilton, we know that we're submitting a water sewer application. We know that, if it's a a design for a new heating system, we'll have to submit HVAC drawings. We may need to submit structural documents. Sometimes we have to call the forestry department, the engineering department, the parking department. That's really where our leverage is because we have that experience to help the investor save time. But they can certainly obtain that information on their own and work with the city. And a lot of people do. We work with a lot of homeowners and investors that really want to be involved in the process because they want to learn. And that's totally fine. And we definitely encourage and welcome them to be part of that process.
Okay, perfect. So I know we are nearing the end of the episode. I wanted to get your thoughts on, maybe your most interesting or your best conversion projects. Like I've heard like wild projects in the past. Like I think I saw one like a few days ago, like one building to like 10 units. Like that's sick.
I think I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa, like that is like huge. But from your standpoint, from your experience, are there any projects that you've done that maybe were just like mind-blowing, were just amazing, were just like unique that you'd like to share, just to give investors like an understanding of how big this is?
Sure, yeah. I've done a handful of projects where we were able to take singles or multiple singles and converted them to multiple units. So we've done it in the Niagara region. We've worked on a couple of projects where we purchased a single family home, severed the lot. So the single family home, we converted that to a 2-unit. And then we severed additional, I think, for both projects, we turned one lot into 3 lots and built semi-detached homes. And within those semi-detached homes, we built 2 units in each one of them. So there was one where we converted 1 unit to 6 units. There was another project we did 3. It was it was 2 lots to 4 lots. And the existing house was 3 units. And then we built an additional semi-detached home with a basement suite. And so we basically converted 3 units to 3 units to 7 units. 3 units to 7 units.
Okay.
So that involved severance, which is a more complicated process because we have to go through what's called a consent application for severance. One of those projects we got rejected from the Committee of Adjustments and had to go through the Ontario Land Tribunal. So that process had extended the whole project, but it was fine because we were in a bull market at the time from around 2018 to 2020 roughly. So we did fairly well on that project. I'm currently working on a 1-unit to a 5-unit in the city of Toronto.
Nice.
Now, I've pivoted a little bit. So, back between 2017 to, I would say, 2021, I would say we were really focused on trying to acquire properties that we could convert the existing home, sever, and then build more. But now with all of these policy changes, Bill 23 and what's happened in Toronto with the multiplex policy, a lot of these projects now can be done as of right, meaning you don't even have to go through a minor variance, right? A lot of the parking minimums have been removed. So the project right now that I'm working on in Toronto, where we're trying to convert one housing unit into 5, the intent is actually to not do it in a way that would trigger a minor variance. And we see that opportunity now because of the policy changes. And I would say we're in the early stages still for now and in the next few years to be able to utilize the new policies to have a competitive advantage for identifying those properties that can be converted without any legwork at the Committee of Adjustments process.
Okay.
So, single family homes, larger single family homes, maybe existing detached garages that can be converted. Yep. So the one we're working on right now, we're trying to convert the single family to 4 and then convert the detached garage to a laneway suite. And we see that as the low-hanging fruit right now to add a ton of value, lower our expenses, and lower the chances of not being able to convert multiple units. That's where I've really pivoted the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Because I see that this is going to keep me busy for years to come. And so it's something that myself and my clients are doing. So yeah, that's something we're working on right now.
Okay, so before we close this, I just wanted to touch on, you mentioned as of right, minor variance. Again, I want to ensure that everyone is tracking. So if you could walk us through, when you say like a property is as of right, and it doesn't require minor variance, like, could you just walk us through what that means?
Yeah. My apologies if I'm throwing out some of these terms that may be technical to some of your audience. As of right or by right, they mean the same thing. Is when you are making changes to the property in a way that doesn't trigger a minor variance. So the bylaws for that city will have certain requirements. So, for example, the size of the house, how many units you can build, what the parking requirements are. Now, if you're not able to comply with those bylaws, you can request for a minor variance with the city and say, hey, you know what? Instead of your 3 parking spaces, I can only provide 2. Can you give me permission? Right.
Okay.
And, we're currently in an environment where the cities are very receptive to that. However, it's still a public process. Your neighbors will get involved, and sometimes they may get they might get the attention of the committee because they're not happy with your project and there's still risk, right?
Yeah.
But because of the changes we're seeing, Bill 23, where, the housing crisis, because of these changes, the policies have made it a lot more favorable for homeowners to be able to do these types of projects without having to go through that public process.
Got it.
And I see that opportunity in the next few years. I think that in 5 years' time, it's all going to be priced in, just like how second suites are priced in now. In a few years, 3 units, 4 units, garden suites, laneway suites, those are going to be priced in. So now's kind of the land grab. If that's my opinion, anyways.
Perfect. And as you summarized earlier, how investors can find these properties is ensure that the lot size allows for an additional dwelling unit as a detached, building, or the basement is large enough, to have a separate unit. In terms of the height of the basement, I know that cities have different height restrictions, but you obviously want it to, be like 7 feet and above. But outside of that, are there any other key triggers or key things that an investor should look at to say, if I see this, boom, this means there's an upside here? Like, is that something that we can start looking out for when we are working these properties, that a wholesaler can say, oh wow, like this could potentially be a conversion project? I'll look into it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you highlighted a very important one, which is height, right? Especially if you do 3 units and higher. One very important distinction that your listeners might need to be aware of is that the way the building code treats a 2-unit house versus a 3-unit plus house, very different, right? So 2 units and under is considered a house. 3 units and more is considered a small building. So the height requirements in the basement are going to be higher. So you need just what you mentioned, 7 feet when you have 3 units and higher. The fire separation is going to be different. The entrance and egress, the emergency egress escape requirements are going to be different, right? So there's not really one thing for them to look for, right? There's going to be many things, right? So you want to be as educated as possible on the things, right? So things like the large, height in the basement is the first one. Access to the individual units, windows, in the basements. How large the lot is, right? Because if you're building a garden suite, you need to have a certain amount of separation between the main house and that unit. And I can't tell you what the number is because every municipality is going to be different.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
So some of the things that I mentioned are code related. Some of the things that I mentioned are bylaw related according to that municipality. And the only way for someone to know is to really dig in and research. Yeah, and reach out to us. I really recommend that you guys check out our YouTube channel because we put a lot of information on there. You go to our website, we have a lot of free documents. And there's a lot of documents online if you go look for it, right? So this is really, I'm hoping that, people get inspired after listening to this and be willing to go out and do more research before they, do any big real estate transactions. Because, if they go buy something with the expectations that they're going to be able to do something and then pay accordingly, they might be disappointed, right?
Perfect. Okay. Well, I can't thank you enough for all the bombs that you dropped, man. Thank you very, very much for, sharing your experience. Before we let you go, as you know, we have a question that we ask everyone, which is what your greatest L in real estate has been and what you learned from it.
Biggest L. Okay. I have a good one for you. It's not in wholesaling. I haven't done much wholesaling. A lot of properties that I've purchased is just straight from MLS. Believe it or not, if you know what you're looking for, you can actually find deals in MLS still. So my biggest L is actually, one of the projects, with a partner where we had a multi-unit apartment, and I probably wouldn't say it's the biggest L, but from a financial side, it was, because it was so challenging. It's such a big project that it seemed like it had really big upside potential.
Yep.
And my lesson from it really is to stay small, is to just focus on doing these multi-unit conversions, because you can do them at a scalable level, so you can still do very well. The time frames are a lot shorter, and being able to recognize that as long as you stay consistent and focus on the fundamentals, you can actually do pretty well, right? Because I know there's a lot of people that are very excited about multifamily investing.
Yep.
And there's definitely a lot of money to be made in that, but there's a lot of competition, and there's a lot of capital involved, and it's a very long time frame, right? So we have clients and investors that we work with where they do very big projects, but they also do small projects, because that kind of helps them maintain their cash flow. And there's nothing wrong with staying small and working on small projects. You can do very well as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Andy. And if anyone wants to connect with you, learn more about everything we've said today, like, what's the best way for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Our website, suiteadditions.com, we have 3 free guides that you can download that will have checklists and beginner's guides on all the stuff that we talked about. A lot of information again on YouTube channel, youtube.com/suiteadditions. We're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. So yeah, follow us, and hopefully you all can, hopefully we provided some value, and we see this as a great opportunity for investors and anybody working in this space as a professional, whether you're a realtor, wholesaler, mortgage professional, contractor, doing conversions is going to be a big thing in the coming years. And I urge everyone to, get involved.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you for this episode. I knew this was going to be a super pumped up episode, because if I believe that the next few years are going to be huge for conversions, for housing densification. Everything the government is doing obviously is leaning towards that, like the housing crisis. Like, this is one of the biggest upsides that I know in the next 5 to 10 years. Everyone needs to know how to do this and just to get involved in this. So thank you very, very much for sharing your experience. That brings us to the close of this episode. Thanks to everyone for listening to the Deals Estate Wholesaling podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on Apple, Google, and Spotify. And be sure to hit that subscribe button and the notification button as well, so that you know when this episode drops and when the next one drops. So until then, remember, a deal a day keeps scarcity at bay.